You're just about to start your 5-day interplanetary excursion, when a strange black hole swallows you up and spits you out somewhere in deep space. After you get sorted in an abandoned spaceship nearby, it's revealed that one of your crewmates is sus. We start things off by meeting Ares Spring. At the spaceport, on her way to meet up with the group she'll be attending a planetary space camp with. After clumsily bumping her luggage into an older lady, she gets her purse snatched by this dude on an electric unicycle. Just then, a man nearby, seeing this happen, begins to chase after the thief. The thief thinks he'll be fine as he's on a bike, but quickly realizes that the guy chasing him is
fast as fuck, boy!
Who then, using his shoes, which have anti-gravity capabilities, jumps high into the air, landing the knockout blow. Ares then retrieves her bag before the man who knocked out the thief gets taken into custody by little police droids, as they think he was the aggressor. She then makes her way over to where the rest of the group has been waiting, and we get a brief look at the differing personalities everyone holds. We get shy, charming, bitchy, detached, confident, overly happy. This guy, who I initially thought was a girl. Yes, that's totally a personality trait. Don't even come at me. And a young girl. Also totally a personality trait. They're then told the situation by their teacher, that they will be delivered to the planet known as McPar, and as soon as they step foot on it, the teachers peace out, leaving the students to their own devices for 5 days. He then goes on to explain that teams are usually given special tasks, and in their case, it's to look after this 10-year-old girl, Phoenicia, who is actually sister to Quethary, this girl here. Just as they're about to leave, it's revealed that the last member of their group they're waiting on was the man we saw earlier, who decked the purse snatcher and goes by the name of Kanata. They all then get suited up and seated as the ship prepares to embark on its journey, entering faster than light travel, which will let them traverse the distance of 9 light years in 4 hours. Pretty damn quick. During the travel, Kanata and Ares get to talking and learn a little bit about each other's past, before they eventually arrive at the planet of McPar. They all step out of the ship, onto the ground, and are excited to be on a completely new planet for the first time, when the ship they came in on, wasting no time, leaves. They then begin to set out for their lodge to get themselves situated, when one of them points to a strange looking sphere that has suddenly appeared right beside them. Thinking that it looks cool, and not being overly concerned as the planet should pose no real danger to them, he walks over to the sphere, where upon touching it, he begins to get stretched and pulled into the small singularity in the center. With a panicked look on his face, he disappears after a flash of red. Kanata then orders everyone to put their helmets back on before they all start to run away from the sphere, which is now following them. One after the other, they all get dragged into the center, leaving behind nothing but a red flash as they go. It finally reaches Kanata and darkness takes him. We then get a flashback to his childhood, as him and his mentor were trying to save a member of their group from falling off a cliff. The ground beneath his mentor's feet gave way, and with no way of reaching him, he told Kanata to focus on keeping everyone alive, even when things seem hopeless, before falling to his death. He then comes to sometime later, floating in space above a planet with an abandoned spaceship nearby, which seems a bit too convenient to be true. He then sees that everyone who got sucked in by the sphere is also close by, and upon opening communications, finds out that they're all okay. They decide that they'll regroup over near the spaceship, using the small amount of thrusters in their suits to get there. They get inside the ship, turn the power on, and activate the artificial gravity, where they then do a quick count and realize that there's only 8 of them, when there should be 9. However, they don't know who's missing as they're so new to meeting each other. When they look out the window, and far off in the distance is Ares, floating in the dead of space, out of fuel for her thrusters and suffering from malfunctioning comms. Because of her distance as well, if someone wants to fly out to get her, they won't have enough fuel in their suit to make it back, making the idea of going to get her seem hopeless. After thinking about it for a while, Kanata picks up a spool of wire, stating that he hates the word hopeless, and intends to bring her back safely. They then attach a hook to his suit, open the airlock, and he jumps out towards her. We then see the situation from Ares' view, thinking that everyone is gone and that she is all alone drifting through the emptiness of space, terrified, when she then sees Kanata approaching her. Just as he gets close though, the wire rope goes taut, pulling him back after being so close to grabbing her. Mama didn't raise no bitch though, and Kanata disconnects the hook, getting ready to full send it on saving Ares, managing to reach her but falling very low on fuel. Using the last little bit of fuel he has, he shoots back towards the ship, letting inertia carry him the rest of the way. But those on board realize that his trajectory is slightly off, and he will fly right past them. Anyone who's played Kerbal Space Program will know exactly what that's like. Thinking quick, those on the ship formulate a plan to stop their momentum, before forming a human ladder to rescue them without having to endanger anyone else to do so. Now with them all safely on board, They think that even though the communication devices on the ship have broken down a bit, when they don't make contact at the scheduled time with the school, a rescue vessel will be sent for them. When Zack breaks some pretty bad news for them, saying that the planet they're currently above is not McPar, and instead of being 9 light years away from home, they are currently 5,012, with no chance of rescue coming. Tensions then begin to rise among members of the group due to the fact that they are stranded out here. When one of them points out that logically, this must all be a test, that it's way too convenient for them to end up 5,000 light years away, and to also end up near a ship that is still functioning. They all agree that them ending up out here is just the result of someone doing a little trolling, just a bit of a goof, until Ares points out that if they didn't have their helmets on, they would have ended up as good as dead. Scratching that idea, Zack points out that the trip back would take at least 3 months at a minimum, and at current, they only have enough food for 3 days. They begin to think that it's all sounding a little bit hopeless, when Kanata explains that he's been in a situation that is similar to this before, saying that when he was younger, he was on a hiking trip with a group of students, and following an accident that led to his teacher and mentor's death, he had to help his classmates survive 7 days in the wilderness until help finally arrived. To then form somewhat of a bond with each other, they all introduce themselves properly. Quithri, Zack, Luca, Chas, Yunhua, Phoenicia, and Olga. Now being a little bit more unified, they come up with an idea of jumping from planet to planet. And Zack, being a genius with a 200 IQ and his space pilot's license, then plots a course between 5 planets, each being 20 days apart, which will let them restock on water and food, before eventually ending up back safely at Earth. As the ship gets ready for takeoff, they all decide that Kanata can get his wish of being captain of the ship. They then collectively name the ship the Astra, after seeing the phrase per aspera ad Astra on the plaque inside the ship, which roughly translates to a tough road leads to the stars, before blasting off for their first planet. 3 days away. After arriving on the planet known as Vilavurs, they step out onto the ground and are immediately met with a creature the size of a dragon with the head of a turtle, which they promptly name Turgon. Very, creative. They then split up into 3 teams to go and gather resources. Zack and Phoenicia are staying with the ship, making sure everything is working properly and getting it ready. Olga and Yunhua are in charge of filling up the water tanks on the ship for the next 20-day voyage, while the rest are going out to forage for food. However, once they step foot into the forest, they quickly realize that, oh yeah, we don't know what the f is edible here. So they decide to just grab whatever they can and figure out if it's edible later. While exploring, they find the local wildlife, tree limbs that can be used as weapons like a spear and a sword, a short chodi tree that pretty much acts as a trampoline, and seeds that shoot up incredibly high before expanding like a parachute. Afterwards, they continue traveling on for a while, looking for more food, when the same sphere that engulfed them earlier suddenly reappears and begins trying to finish the job. As they run away from it, due to her photographic memory, Ares points out landmarks in the trees and is able to guide them all safely out of the forest away from the sphere. They then all meet back up, and tensions begin to rise as it seems like they're being hunted down by this thing, and Quithri becomes increasingly distraught about being stuck in this sort of situation. And as Phoenicia tries to calm her down, Quithri yells at her, saying that she's not even her real sister, before storming off out of the ship, on a foreign planet, which she's spent less than a day on. Yeah, good idea. Some time passes, and since Quithri hasn't returned, they all go out looking for her. As they're trying to find her, Luca comments on how Zack seems to know her quite well, and he explains that he's known her since childhood, and she's always had this sort of attitude. He says that she comes from a wealthy family, but she never had a father, and as her mother was a busy doctor, she was never around, so she was basically raised by the staff and the caretakers. This results in her having pretty much a 0 in social skills, and her inability to express herself was made even worse when her mother adopted Phoenicia. We then see that Quithri is nearby and can hear their conversation. She then thinks back to when her mother told her that her best friend had passed away, so they're going to be adopting her daughter Phoenicia as it's the right thing to do. Her mother then instructs Quithri with taking care of her, to which she thinks she has no idea how to do that, as no one in her life has ever shown her any love, and she's never been taken care of herself. Cutting back to the present, Phoenicia has found and jumped on one of the trampoline trees, looking for a flower to give her sister, which we then suddenly see go meow high up into the sky. Panicked, they then rush up to a cliff face nearby, which is on the same level she is, trying to figure out what to do. Chas deduces that the trees must be reacting to the sunlight, and when the night falls, it should shrink back down, which would be all good. Except, remember those Turgons I mentioned earlier? Yeah, well, one of them's back, and for it, Phoenicia is looking like a snack. Just then, the absolute Chad Kanata does a run and jump from the cliff face onto one of the nearby risen treetops, sticking the landing. As Kanata jumps from treetop to treetop, Zack remembers that he's read a news story about him one time. Supposedly, that he's a top-performing decathlete. Phoenicia is then picked up by the Turgon. When Kanata notices one of the tree-like spears they were messing around with earlier is up top on the tree, he lines up the shot before landing clean on the Turgon, who drops Phoenicia, luckily onto the treetop, and not onto the ground below. He then makes his final jump onto the treetop she is on. After landing though, due to the strain of his previous jumps, his legs give out and he begins to fall off the edge. Luckily, Quiteri thought something like this might happen and launches one of the seeds up towards him, saving him and letting them both safely make their way down together. With everyone ready to leave the planet, they make their way back to the ship, bringing along the Turgon's body with them. Once inside, over dinner, Zack reveals that he's created a device which will let them test the edibility of food they find on other planets, so they don't have to worry about, dying from death. Afterwards, Zack confides in Kanata that while he was analyzing the ship today, he had found out that the communicator in their ship had been intentionally destroyed, and the cuts which were done to destroy it are very new, meaning that someone among them is committing sabotage. We pick things back up sometime later, as they're zooming through space towards their next planet to refuel on supplies. Kanata begins to analyze all crewmates for signs of suspicion, but after running through all of their traits and personalities, he can't manage to figure out who might be the saboteur impostoring as their friend. He realizes that everyone is slightly suspicious, but at the same time, they're acting in a way that is completely understandable due to their current circumstances. Eventually, they reach just outside the orbit of their next planet known as Shumoor, where Phoenicia begins talking about the time she spent going through the adoption process, and how she only spent a few days at the orphanage before she was arranged to live with Quiteri's family. Everyone else exclaims how unusually fast that seems, and Luca asks her if she was surprised that it all happened so quickly. When she says not really, as when she arrived there, she woke in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and she overheard the headmaster talking to a man wearing sunglasses at night, because he's chill like that, about her getting adopted, and also overhearing them mention that they'll put her on B5 and illuminate them all. Everyone thinks that makes no sense, when Kanata realizes that the team comprising of all of them here was originally called B5, and she must have misheard eliminate as illuminate. Realizing that maybe someone planned to put them all on the same team to kill them out in space, they all begin to think that this must be an inside job, and that the man in sunglasses is working with someone in the school to make sure they all ended up out here. Olga then pipes up, stating that his father is the vice principal of the school, and that he wouldn't be too surprised if he wanted him out of the picture, as he views his son as a failure. Kanata then views this as the perfect time, and reveals that someone among them had destroyed the communicator. And as you would expect, panic and suspicion begins to set in, as none of them can prove to each other that they aren't the enemy. In order to calm everyone's nerves, Ares suggests they have snack time, which somehow works. And while eating, Kanata asks if there's any reason why people would want them dead. Zack then comments on how even if there were any reasons, it would be at an individual level, and surely not every member of the group at the same time. Ares then points out that the killer in the group must have been planning to get sucked into space too, possibly willing to die for the attempt on their lives to be complete. As they're discussing this, a water pipe in the ship suddenly explodes, revealing a hole which is letting oxygen out of the ship. Just then, the gravity generator gets disabled, and Kanata panics over the idea that someone placed a bomb. Chas then comes over, saying that this might be the reason behind the pipe exploding, revealing a small meteorite that had impacted the side of the ship. Zack then apologizes, as he states that he must have forgotten to turn the ship's deflector shields on. Luca then repairs the hole in the wall, while Zack goes to investigate what's gone wrong with their gravity, revealing that a small meteorite had broken through the hole back here as well. And while the gravity control equipment is fine, a breaker panel had gotten hit and brought the whole system down, which will take some time to repair. Only time is something they don't really have right now, as the Astra has been brought into Shumoor's orbit and is descending quickly towards the surface of the planet. And within 9 minutes, if they don't get everything working, they'll become a very small smear on the surface of the planet. Ares, conveniently, then states that she found a backup generator which they can use while the breaker panel is down, as they won't have time to repair it fully. So they set out to work. connecting cables from the backup generator to the main power system, with Luca plugging up the hole in the gravity generator room. They all manage to get everything sorted and the power connected, except for one tiny problem. A small flying creature which had stowed away from the previous planet, causing the gravity generator's safety mechanism to kick in, not letting them activate it and take control of the ship just yet. Luckily, Olga then shows up, getting the glue gun repair tool off of Luca before bracing, shooting his shot, and expertly taking out the small flying creature. With power restored, Zack manages to land the Astra, just barely avoiding a crash with the planet. Afterwards, as they're celebrating, Olga leaves the room and Luca comments on how good of a shot he was. And as Olga walks into his room, he opens up a briefcase, revealing that he secretly does keep that blicky on him. A short time later, as they all successfully work together to avoid the whole violently crashing into the planet thing, they decide that the imposter must also have a desire for their own survival, as if they had suicidal tendencies, then they could have easily ensured that they would have all crashed. So for now, they won't actively investigate or be suspicious of each other to continue this process of working together. They then step foot on the planet, which seems to have ground mostly comprised of moss, and they set out on their search for food, finding several edible plants along the way and a water source in the form of these massive cactus. As they're looking around a large pole-shaped tree, they discover the remains of several herbivores, indicating that it seems the moss-like planet feeds on them. Just then, living versions of these herbivores walk up to them, seemingly friendly, which they quickly name Gruppies. After they meet back up at the ship, they find out that all the food they thought would be edible spoils incredibly quick, so it can't be stored for the 20 days they would need. While discussing it inside, they come to the realization that they only have enough food for 5 days if they conserve it to the max. And Kanata says that they need to try and find other sources of food on the planet, and that they're not leaving until they get the 20 days they need. Luca then makes a comment at Yunhua about her eating more than everyone else due to her being a bit taller. And the next day, Ares comes running to Kanata as she found a note from Yunhua stating that she will stay on the planet and for them to leave without her. This, however, doesn't really float with Kanata, and he goes out searching for her, leaving Quithri in charge while he's gone. We then see Yunhua, having walked far away, begin to beautifully start singing, and we get a flashback to her childhood, where she was picked first in a play, but when she told her mother about it, she was told to just give it up, and that she wouldn't be able to handle that position and would only fail and cause trouble for everyone else, revealing just how emotionally abusive her mother is, and that her shy demeanor is due to how she was raised her entire life. Kanata then eventually finds her, and she shares to him how her mother had treated her in the past, and he reassures her that no matter what had happened then, it doesn't matter now. No one here on the Astra views her as useless. Elsewhere, we see the rest of the crew still looking around for her, when one of the top of the giant pole-like trees begins to unfurl, releasing spores into the air which are quickly shown to have poisonous qualities, as everyone nearby collapses to the ground, passing out. Meanwhile, near Kanata, they notice the same thing going on around them, but as they have their suits on, they are unaffected. Although, when one of the Gruppies comes nearby, it passes out. Thinking that it must just be exhausted, Yunhua brings over a fruit she found near the giant poultry, which quickly lets it recover its strength. Just as they're about to head back, Chas calls over the helmet, warning Kanata about what's going on and giving him the rundown on the trees here being poisonous. They then gather everyone up and take them inside the ship, where it seems the only person unaffected by the effects is Quithri, who was inside the ship the whole time. While she is unsure if she'll be able to properly cure them, Chas comments that there must be some way the ecosystem regulates how many creatures die when this process occurs. Otherwise, this planet would be barren. Kanata tells him about how they fed the Gruppy and it felt better after, and they realize that that must be the secret they need, leaving Kanata to go off in search of the antidote. While waiting for Kanata to come back, it seems like even Quithri has begun to get affected by the spores and begins to pass out. In order to try and make them feel better, Yunhua thinks back on her conversation with Kanata and begins to follow his advice. Finally realizing that they are all friends, she sings to them to soothe their minds, so they don't have to think about feeling sick. Kanata eventually manages to retrieve the antidote from the tree, before racing back towards the Astra, saving everyone. After the group manages to recover, they credit Yunhua's singing for keeping them alive, and find out that she is the daughter of famous singer Lucy Lum. Finally realizing that she has found somewhere she actually belongs, Yunhua cuts her hair short, in a declaration of her newfound family. The next day, they manage to find a stable food source after realizing that the giant poultries are actually mushrooms and completely edible. They then spend a few days gathering supplies before leaving behind Shumoor, and also leaving behind their grumpy friends they made along the way. Meanwhile, we cut back to Earth, to Ares' mother re-watching the final video message she received from her daughter before they disappeared. We find out that the authorities have pretty much all but given up on finding the missing students, after an exhaustive search on McPar which had been done by the government. The parents of all the missing students then meet up, and Olga's father suggests that what would be best for all of them is to finally accept the truth that their children are gone, and to pronounce them all legally dead. And the only one who really has anything to say against this is Ares' mother. Everyone else just seems pretty alright with calling off any further searches, stating that it's unrealistic to expect them to suddenly turn up after all these searches they've done. We also see that the man Phoenicia was talking about earlier, the cool shades guy, is also here, although he doesn't give any input into the discussion. Ares' mother states that it doesn't make any sense that there is no trace of them at all. They didn't take any of the boats anywhere, and none of their luggage has shown up. She assumes that they've somehow ended up in space somewhere, which immediately gets shut down by all of the other parents there. The only one missing, however, is Luca's father, Marco, a powerful government official who, when asked to share his feelings about his son's disappearance, states quite blankly that it feels like his body is being torn apart. The exact same thing Olga's father had said. Some time passes and we cut back to the group, who had all safely landed on the oceanic world known as Aerospade, where they all seem to finally have some sort of relaxation. This is the best episode of the series, for many reasons. I'll let you decide those reasons among yourselves. Food on the planet is plentiful, and Chas discovers that all life on the planet reproduces via parthenogenesis, meaning that they basically fuck with themselves to make offspring. After spending a few days on the planet, Queethry starts teasing Ares about her feelings for Kanata, convincing her to try and confess to him. However, when she tries, Kanata just straight up doesn't pick up what she's trying to put down at all, annoying both her and Queethry. Luca and Olga, who have managed to get somewhat close despite Olga's unfriendly personality, decide to go fishing, with Luca trying to get Olga to open up more to him. Though, when Luca reveals to him that his last name is Esposito, something changes in Olga, and he becomes completely shocked, asking if his father is Marco Esposito, to which Luca admits he is. Later that evening, the group has a picnic to celebrate their last night on Aerospade, when Olga appears, walks over to Luca before placing the gun that he found on his head, telling him that if he moves, he will die. We pick things up right where we left off, with Olga holding that gat at Luca's head. Kanata is about to get up and run over to him when he shoots a tree nearby, showing that he isn't playing around and this gun isn't a joke. Olga states that he isn't doing this for a show of power or trying to make himself in charge of their group with force, saying that he isn't the enemy, and that he has a personal grievance with Luca, before telling him that he's going to die. Luca asks him how he could possibly have a personal grudge against him, especially when he thought that they were friends. And Olga explains that if he wants to blame anyone for the situation he's currently in, he should blame his father, stating that he's been trying to find Marco Esposito for a while now, with the sole purpose in mind of killing him. He explains that he had a brother that was 5 years older than him, who everyone loved while he was shunned. This didn't really bother him all too much though, as he enjoys being alone and doesn't really care if people treat him poorly. His brother was really the only exception in his life, as someone who treated him with love and kindness. He elaborates that his brother eventually became a freelance journalist, going after and exposing politicians and big companies to the world for their criminal misconduct. This in turn gave Olga a sense of direction with what he might want to do with his life, which is follow in his brother's footsteps and become a journalist also. One day though, his brother died, the cause of death being that he apparently fell off a building, which the police ruled as suicide. Only, he mentioned to Olga several times in the weeks leading up to his death that he's got himself mixed up with a pretty bad crowd on the case he's currently working. Olga went through his files and found out that the prime target he was after was Marco Esposito, who apparently had several campaign donation violations. Olga doesn't believe for a second that his brother actually committed suicide, and tells Luca that his father killed his brother. Luca then responds in a way he didn't expect, by saying that it sounds like something his father would do. Olga states that he vowed to avenge his brother, and trained in marksmanship endlessly, getting really good at it. And finally, when he found this gun on the Astra, it's almost like fate had made the decision for him. And now Marco will understand how it feels to lose a family member, through the loss of Luca. Just as Olga is about to pull the trigger, Luca says that what he's doing is useless, as he and Olga are the same. He explains that he isn't loved by his family either, and he isn't even the heir to the Esposito family, as even though their family are hereditary politicians, his little brother will be the one to inherit Marco's political power when the time comes. Olga thinks he's just lying to try and save himself, when Luca states that he has proof, standing up and taking off his shirt, revealing that he is actually a she. I fucking knew I was right in episode 1. Well, kinda. Just then, an earthquake rocks their little island, which slowly subsides. Luca then states that he isn't completely male, nor is he completely female. He is intersex. Throughout his childhood, he was raised as a boy, and only found out that he has both male and female characteristics after a checkup in a hospital. He states that if his father knew from the start, they never would have taken him in, revealing to everyone that he was adopted into the Esposito family as they couldn't conceive. While they're talking, Kanata begins to realize that pretty much everyone here has problems with their parents, thinking that that might be what connects them. Luca states that his parents later did conceive a boy, and after they found out about Luca's intersexuality around the same time, his father's interest shifted completely from Luca to their child. He then says that if Olga was to kill him right now, it would most likely be a relief for his father, as he wouldn't have to pretend to care about him any longer. Olga then realizes that they both truly are the same, just outcasts from their family. Just then, the sun begins to go down very quickly, and as darkness begins to set in, Kanata realizes that what made the sun go away is actually a massive tsunami heading towards them, produced from the earthquake earlier. They then begin to all race back towards the ship, and most of the group manages to make it safely on board the Astra. But Olga and Luca didn't make it in time and were washed away. Olga then attempts to sacrifice himself to ensure Luca's safety, but they both end up being rescued by Kanata, who bungee jumps down into the water and picks them up. After they leave Aerospade, Olga apologizes to Luca and vows to return home alive to investigate his brother's death. Zack then brings up the possibility that Olga's brother may have uncovered a much deeper conspiracy than government corruption, which may be why they've all been targeted. Olga decides that he will become a journalist like his brother, and Kanata allows Olga to keep possession of the gun since he's the only one who knows how to use it. Sometime later, Ares gets into a conversation with Chas about what classes he takes at school, and she notices an inconsistency in his story, when she doesn't remember seeing him in any of the biology classes he claimed to have attended. And considering that she has a photographic memory, this becomes a bit concerning. The group then confronts Chas, suspecting that he is hiding something from them. He briefly tries to argue the point, but as everyone believes Ares over him, he concedes and begins to explain himself. He states that he is a transfer student who only entered their school right before camp started. Kanata demands to know why he didn't tell them sooner, like when Ares mentioned herself that she transferred to the school recently as well. And he explains that he didn't think it was too important, and mainly just doesn't wish to talk about his past, to which Zack says that usually would be alright. But right now, they are under anything but normal circumstances. Seeing no way of getting around it, Chas explains that he is from a noble family belonging to the Vixia royal quarter, to the shock of everyone, which is a nation on their planet that still operates under the rule of nobility and kings, maintaining the era of technology that was present during medieval times. Kinda like medieval Amish, I suppose. In the past, we see that he had befriended a commoner girl named Sira, and wanting to show her the area in which he lived, he smuggled her into the region through a crack in the walls. One day while they were playing, Sira accidentally bumped into a guard who quickly detected her as a commoner, and trying to get away, she bites his hand. In response, the guard hits her away a bit too hard, causing her to fall off the railings of where they were onto the ground far below. And although she didn't die, she did end up in a coma due to her injuries, with Chas visiting her daily to the disdain of his father who thinks he shouldn't be meddling with commoners. Some time passes and Sira's family eventually leaves Vixia, taking Sira away with them and not telling Chas where they went. Sometime following that, Chas eventually leaves as well, wanting to learn biology so he can find and heal her one day. He apologizes to all of them for not revealing this sooner, and everyone forgives him due to the sadness of his story, which has touched them emotionally. Chas goes to get some more tea for them all, and Ares follows close behind, where they begin to talk about Sira, where Chas admits that Ares reminds him a lot of her. Yeah, well, I mean, Ares spelled backwards is Sira, so that could have something to do with it. Oh, the pink hair too. Something's going on here. Several days pass and they eventually end up at the next planet on their list, Icarus. However, once they arrive just outside the orbit, they realize that its rotation is perfectly in line with its orbit around the sun, meaning that while one side is permanently locked in a scorching hot solar radiation death zone, the other is permanently frozen. This means that the only place viable for them to find liquid water and food to sustain their next part of the journey is a small belt between both sections. Deciding that will be their best and only bet, they head down towards the planet, where upon seeing some of the native wildlife, They begin to get attacked by these massive carnivorous plants, resulting in the Astra suffering from massive damage to its control systems, causing them to lose control and crash land into thankfully a safe-ish spot next to some water. Afterwards, Zack admits that while the Astra can still fly a little, due to the damage it has suffered, there is no way it will possibly reach space any longer, and they don't have the necessary means of fixing it, meaning that this will be their final destination and that they are stuck here. To which Queethree is like, say psych. Please say psych right now. Focusing on one thing at a time while not trying to believe the current circumstances they're in, they go out foraging for food and water, where Phoenicia notices something shiny in the distance and wants to go investigate with Chas. Elsewhere, as they're gathering water, which appears to not be contaminated in any way, they get a call from Chas and they make their way over to him, where they see a ship that looks exactly like the Astra, rusted over and abandoned. They make their way inside, where they see that despite the ship still having power, it's completely broken down and dilapidated, seeming that it ended up just like their ship did. After checking the communication systems, they find a message asking for help, which Zack realizes is coming from the hibernation pod in the ship. As they make their way down there, they realize that whoever is in here has been waiting 12 years for someone to come and rescue them. They then decide that they will bring them out of hibernation, revealing a young woman inside, which I don't really know why they would bring her out, as they are completely stuck here too, and can't rescue her. That would be one hell of an awkward conversation. They bring the woman back to the Astra, where she tells them that she is Polina Livinskaya, an astronaut from the ship Ark-6. They had originally been sent out to find worlds suitable for human habitation, but were forced to crash land on Icarus. The rest of her crew went out to explore the planet, but never returned, forcing her to use the hibernation pod to survive. Ares then gets the idea that since the Astra and the Ark-6 are modular and of the same ship type, they can switch out the damaged systems of the Astra and replace them with the working ones of the Ark-6. Sometime later, Yunhua tells Polina that she's been asleep for 12 years, and it's now 2063. Polina then panics upon learning this information, but doesn't reveal why. The ship repairs then turn out to be a complete success, and the group returns to foraging for food. Zack and Queethree then have a quiet moment together, where Zack reveals that he doesn't want to be like his father, who has become cold and uncaring due to his memory transplant research, and he instead plans on becoming the pilot for Kanata's future spaceship when they all get out of this. Queethree, however, isn't a fan of this whole idea, and finally admits that one of her dreams in the future is to marry Zack, and that's not going to happen if he's out in space with Kanata. And while being confused, Zack nonchalantly reminds her that they already promised to get married when they were children, before blankly stating that he's always been in love with her. Afterwards, before the group finally leaves Icarus, they head out to investigate the fate of Polina's crew, and discover that they were killed by carnivorous plants hidden underground, where Kanata manages to retrieve her fallen crewmates' dog tags. The group leaves Icarus and begins to move on to their final and last planet before reaching home, as they all donated blood for Polina because she was so weak after being in hibernation for such a long time. Queethree notices that her and Phoenicia's blood types are an exact match, which is a highly unlikely coincidence for adopted siblings. Later, Zack offers to perform a DNA test and is shocked to discover that Queethree and Phoenicia are genetically identical, which he privately reveals to Kanata. We pick things back up with the crew all together for an emergency meeting, where Zack reveals the information to everyone, that Queethree and Phoenicia have the exact same DNA structure, meaning that they are clones. He states that he originally thought that they might have been twins, and Phoenicia was just put into a hibernation pod when she was younger, but if that happened, she would have definitely remembered it. Kanata then drops some bombs, telling everyone that he's found out what connects them all and why they've been sent out here to die, revealing that he thinks it's not just Phoenicia and Queethree, that every single crew member is in fact a clone. Everyone begins to freak out and call him crazy, but he tells them to just think about it, stating that he believes their parents are actually the original versions that they are cloned from. Olga then reminds them all that making a human clone is considered a grave crime back home, and says that no one would go through all of that risk. Zack then says he has a theory as to why they would risk it, explaining that his father has been researching the method of transplanting memories, which, upon doing so, would essentially swap someone's consciousness to a new body, basically living forever if they had a young clone to swap themselves to. Zack then theorizes that his father must have gathered a group of allies who all wanted the same sort of thing, and the puzzle pieces all begin to set into place, as everyone realizes how likely this theory is. Meanwhile, back home, we see that all parents except for Ares and Chas's are meeting up and lamenting over the fact that recently, the government introduced a law known as the Genome Control Act, which, with even the simplest of blood tests, would expose their children as clones, and land them all all in deep trouble, which is why they decided to all dispose of their clones far off in deep space, so it could never be tracked back to them. Olga's father then states that since the plan of theirs is completely finished now, there's no need for any of them to stay in contact any longer. Back on the Astra, everyone is distraught at the recent revelation, and Ares proclaims that her mother would never do anything like they're claiming. Zack says that if everything they've theorized so far is true, then the woman she thinks of her mother might not actually be so. Kanata then tells them that it doesn't matter if they don't have parents, or even if everything they've known up till this point was a lie. They've made a family here, and now they have even more of a reason to return home safely to bring their parents to justice. Afterwards, Kanata approaches each and every member of the crew to see how they're holding up, after having the groundwork of their lives completely shaken. He finds out, however, that many of them have found their own sense of closure regarding their family situations, explaining how this has made their parents' actions and lack of affection throughout their lives make a lot more sense to them. Following that, Zack and Queethree decide to announce to everyone that they are going to be getting married and are now engaged, bringing joy to all crew members. Some time passes, and Zack manages to fix a broken space telescope they found on the Arc 6 on Icarus, letting them now see planets up to 2,000 light years away. In other words, after these long months out in space, they can now see their home. As the excitement of finally being home builds, Polina walks in and asks them what's got them so pumped up. When Ares explains that they can see their home, she begins to tear up, realizing that this isn't a dream and she'll finally be able to return to Earth. But as she takes a closer look at the landscapes, she begins to have doubts and asks them all if this is really Earth, stating that the shapes for all the continents are completely wrong. No one else, though, notices any inconsistencies with the planet, and she hysterically asks them to double check if this is really Earth, when Kanata says that he doesn't know what Earth is, stating that their home planet is named Astra. The crew then sit down together to figure out what's going on, coming to the conclusion that due to the differing landmasses, Astra and Earth must be completely different planets. They then begin to compare the history between what Polina knows and what they know, although it becomes a difficult task, as the world that Polina knew still had countries and states, where currently Astra has one unified government and no concept of nations or geopolitical sovereignty. Ares, however, is the main link, as she's read a lot of books about what they call the Old Era. Throughout their discussion, they arrive at the result that everything matches up between their histories until the year 1962, where it states in Astra's history that things didn't go all too great during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and following a missile strike on the island, the world was plunged into World War III, leading to a nuclear war which in 2 months snapped half the world's population away, leading the survivors to form a unified world government and abolishing countries, guns, and religions, overcoming differences in race and ethnicity, working together to rebuild a peaceful world. Polina then explains how in her history, even though things were never truly peaceful, there was never another global war. However, a much greater threat appeared, one that would overwrite all possible human conflicts. An asteroid, 300 kilometers wide, on a collision course with Earth, arriving in 8 years. She explains that their only option was to find another habitable planet for them to migrate to, and this is what the Ark ships were designed to do. After they found a suitable planet, they would then migrate everyone with the artificial wormhole technology they had, the same tech that caused them all to end up out here in the first place. She states that due to them being here, the plan must have been completed successfully, and they all migrated to the planet they call home, Astra. And afterwards, the asteroid must have struck Earth. Queethree then asks how Earth is now, when Polina states that when they told her about their story, they mentioned that after the wormhole sphere swallowed them up, they were spat out above a frozen, solid, lifeless planet. She believes that must have been what remains of Earth, stating that the area they ended up in was most likely one of the wormhole gates used in the migration. They then begin to question the chronology of things, as the current year is 2063, and the migration was supposedly complete in the year 2057, meaning that their world was built in 6 years, and none of them remember being on Earth originally. So there must be something else they're missing. Ares then suggests that maybe they shouldn't think too much on it yet, and should instead focus on getting home first, as there's nothing they can really gain from speculation right now. Some time passes, and they arrive at their next and final planet on the list, Gallum. And while out foraging for food alone, Kanata begins to think that due to there being no attacks since they first started, the imposter must also now view them as friends and companions, wanting to get out of this situation just as much as everyone else does, when a light suddenly appears behind him, revealing the wormhole back at it again, where he narrowly manages to escape from it after running into Ares. Afterwards, he makes his way back to the ship, where he thinks that the enemy's plan all along must have been to wait until they reach this final planet. then to eliminate everyone and return home on the Astra all by themselves. Only now Kanata has figured out who the secret enemy behind all of this has been, and the enemy doesn't know that he knows, declaring that he'll make the first move tomorrow. The next day, he privately approaches Chas and Zack, telling them that he was attacked by the sphere the previous day, and he now knows exactly who has been behind this all along, stating that it's Olga, but he doesn't have the definite proof yet and needs their help to get it. He says that due to Olga having both the gun and access to portable wormhole technology, they can't just lock him up, and need to entrap him, asking Chas to go out foraging with him to act as bait, taking him to a secluded spot in a cave nearby. Kanata then says that he's messed with Olga's gun, so it won't fire straight away, which will give them the opportunity they need to take him out. The plan begins to go ahead, with Kanata and Zack close behind. Olga and Chas eventually reach a dead end, when Kanata suddenly tells Chas through the communicator to abort the mission, as Phoenicia has gone missing. As Chas gets to his feet about to leave, Olga begins to hold Chas at gunpoint, and when he pulls the trigger, the gun doesn't shoot. After a moment of confusion, the sphere suddenly appears, and Kanata runs up behind Chas, grabs his hand, and tells him to turn off the sphere, stating that he knew it was him, grabbing the device out of his hand, declaring Chas the enemy. Olga then states that his gun wasn't tampered with, he can shoot it whenever he wants, revealing that this was all an act to entrap him. All other members of the crew then show up, revealing that everyone was in on it, and although they don't want to believe that Chas is the enemy, they are desperate to be proven wrong. Chas then asks Kanata how he knew it was him, and he explains that the imposter would have had to be the last person to be sucked into the wormhole, to ensure that the entire group would be eliminated. Chas then admits his role in all of this, and reveals that he knew he was a clone from the very start, and that his original is Noah Vix, the current king of Vixia. Chas reveals that since his birth, he was raised with the sole mission in life of being the king's spare body, not given any agency to what he himself might want to do. During this time, even though he knew he was being raised like a pig to the slaughter, he was allowed to gain information about the outside world, where he developed an interest in biology. When the Genome Control Act was passed, however, and his life no longer served any purpose, he was assigned the mission to eliminate the other clones and then himself. Kanata doesn't quite believe him, pointing out how Chas has always deactivated the wormhole before anyone could be sucked in. Chas explains that he stopped his attempts because he didn't want to bring any harm to Ares, who he reveals to be Syrah's clone, and that unlike what he told them in his original story, Syrah is actually Noah's daughter, the princess of Vixia. He reveals his true past, where Syrah helped raise him but was completely opposed to the cloning project, and Ares was born without her knowledge. And unwilling to subject Ares to a doomed fate, Syrah secretly had Ares' surrogate mother smuggle her out of Vixia to live a normal life. Sometime following this though, Syrah is pushed off a cliff and killed by an assassin. After Syrah's death, Chas felt like this mission was his only purpose in life. Kanata still remains unconvinced and points out how much Chas enjoyed interacting with everyone here and that their friendship is genuine. The other students also try to convince Chas that he doesn't have to be beholden to Noah's wishes, and that he can be his own person. Overcome with guilt, Chas attempts self-deletion by using a backup wormhole controller and creating a wormhole between himself and everyone else. Kanata then charges straight at the wormhole, but uses his anti-gravity shoes to jump over it and tackle Chas. Kanata then convinces Chas to stop his suicide attempt, but not before the wormhole is so close that he loses his right arm above the elbow in the process. This shocks Chas back to his senses, and Kanata reminds him of the promise he made earlier of how he would be Kanata's second in command on his future spaceship. We then see Kanata's arm floating above the Earth, and Queethary is able to stop the bleeding with Chas helping Kanata get back to the Astra. Despite Chas's actions, Kanata and the rest of the group still accept him as one of their own, convincing him to live for himself. They eventually forage for enough food to leave Gallum, and Kanata has some time to rest with Ares taking care of him. Chas then tells everyone about the truth relating to Astra and Vixia, which is a secret kept closely guarded by the royal family. He explains that in the past, the nations of Earth developed wormhole technology to evacuate the population to Astra. However, when the plan was released to the public, war immediately broke out as different nations attempted to fight over land on Astra, leading the wormholes to be misused as weapons, allowing for assassinations to easily take place, alongside almost impossible to detect bomb placement. A single world government was finally formed to bring about peace, but not after half of the world's population was killed. As a result, the world government decided to destroy all wormholes to prevent them from ever being used again. They also decided to manipulate history, so that later generations would be unaware of the wormhole technology that brought them to Astra. In reality though, 100 years had passed since the Earth was destroyed, making the true year 2163. The students then become resolved and decide that now is the time to tell all of Astra the truth about their past. However, their originals and the government remain an obstacle to to their plan. So Kanata has the Astra briefly stop above McPar, so Ares can send a message containing their entire story and pictures of the planets they visited to her mother, who the group knows they can trust with instructions to contact a police officer that worked with Olga's brother. As they return to Astra, they are greeted by a fleet of warships who welcome them home, and inform them that their originals have been arrested for the illegal cloning and attempted murder. After they return home, the group becomes celebrities overnight, with Kanata and Chas convincing the government to reveal the truth about Earth. Kanata manages to defuse the resulting public uproar by writing a best-selling book recounting his experiences during his journey home, and Chas then becomes the new king of Vixia, but immediately gives up all political power, opening up Vixia's borders and releasing wormhole technology to the public. As it's now a relic of the old Earth era, the Astra is put into a museum, and eventually, all of the kids, except for Phoenicia, finally graduate from high school. 7 years pass, and Olga has become a journalist. Polina, at the young and breezy age of 126, is a teacher at Caird High School, and Phoenicia is now in high school as well. Ares, Quithri, and Luca attend Yunhua's concert, where Ares finally reveals that Kanata proposed to her. Meanwhile, Kanata has used his fortune to buy the Astra as well as a new prosthetic arm designed by Zack. Together with Zack and Chas, they head off into space to explore new worlds to place wormholes on. Just before they take off, Kanata sees a visage of his old mentor, finally fulfilling his wishes of going off to space. Hey, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.